G'day, guys. Welcome back to the show. Today I'm joined by Mark Scrivens. Some of you may already be familiar with Mark, who was on MAFS season 6, obviously massive show in Australia, and we might get a chance to unpack that a little bit today too. I'm just curious, so that'll be a bit of fun. But Mark is also a mental health advocate. He's a ripping bloke, I should say too, but he's a mental health advocate and facilitator for LIVIN, which is a non-profit organization helping to break the stigma of mental health. If you guys are long-time listeners of this show and the stuff that I put out to the world, you know that I'm wildly passionate about all things psychology, human performance, and certainly mental health. And at a time like right now, I think these sorts of conversations are certainly worth exploring anyway. But the LIVIN group, they run programs. They're a fantastic community and offer some pretty epic apparel too. So you guys go scope it out and get your hands on some of that. But Mark, mate, appreciate you carving out the time. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, very welcome. Happy to be here. Yeah.
We were chatting off air earlier and of course yesterday a bit, getting to know each other and touched on the intro there, mate. Ripping bloke. So I'm excited to just have a chat and hear what you've been up to. But I mentioned also people may be familiar with you from MAFS. Obviously got a good platform now off the back of that, great community, which of course probably helps promote some of the work that you're doing with LIVIN and some of the mental health messages there. But firstly, mate, the getting on the show, how'd that come about and why did you apply?
Yeah, so I actually didn't apply. I got approached. So me and a mate of mine, who was the best man on the show, we were just at a bar. We were just at Garden State on a Saturday arvo. It was about 6 p.m. We'd already had a pretty lengthy afternoon in the city.
Yeah.
And these two young kids, probably early 20s, male and female, just approached us, basically asked if we were single. They said yes. They said, what are you up to basically for the next couple of months? So obviously I'd watched the show the previous year and I was aware of everything. So I knew exactly what I was getting myself into.
Yeah.
But once the dust settled Monday morning when they rang, I had a good think about it and weighed a few options up and realized I was 41 at the time. I was single. I was just recently moved to Melbourne. I was in a position to be able to do it. And I was sort of old enough to deal with any positive and negative feedback that was going to come my way. So at the time, I just looked at it as an adventure, looked at it as something to do. And I was in the right frame of mind, physically and mentally, to have a crack at it.
Did you think it was a stitch up at first when you've got these two people approaching you in a bar saying, hey, we want you for telly?
No, I'd heard stories before that's how they were doing it.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
I knew previously, I don't know where I read it, but I knew that they would probably struggled a little bit to find males to do the show. Out of my year, which I think there was 24 in total, people that was on it, I think probably only maybe 8 of those had applied. The rest had been approached at certain areas. So I knew that going in that might, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Simple as that. We'd only been at the Garden State for literally 3 minutes before they approached. So they're the right place, right time.
Is there any highlights that stand out for you? Admittedly, mate, I haven't actually seen much of the show, so I'm just curious. Was there any sort of highlights to you that kind of stood out for you?
Yeah, look, there's some really good moments on the show, and there was some times when I really, really enjoyed it. Ning and I, my partner on the show, we actually got along really well. There's a few hiccups at the start from both sides. I won't point the finger at either. From both sides, there was a lot of walls. There was travel. She was in Townsville. I was in Melbourne. So there was a 1,700 kilometre barrier. There was 3 kids involved at the time. So there were a lot of things we had to get over in the first couple of weeks. But to be honest, once the dust had settled from that, we actually got along really well off camera, which ended up showing on camera later on. We just weren't able to sort of get over the line where one of us was in a position where we're happy enough to move. That was the big key. I'd only been in Melbourne 6 months, moving down from Canberra, and she hadn't left Townsville. So, to be honest, mate, it was a pretty bit of a no-brainer in the end. We just weren't able to get over that geographical barrier.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, you've come out the other end, with a big social following, of course, a platform now, and a beautiful partner as well. I know that wasn't directly through the show, but you've, for those that aren't familiar, Bianca, I believe her name is Bianca.
Yeah, Bianca Chatfield. Yep,
that's the one.
Former Aussie netballer. Yeah, so she was on the block. She was on the block the same year I was on, with one of her best friends, Carla Dawkey. So they did the Gatwick block.
Oh, yep.
And it's weird looking back now because she just heard me. I did a radio interview on Nova at like weirdly like 7:30 in the morning, and she just happened to be driving to an appointment and heard me on the radio and thought, geez, this guy doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah.
Never watched the show, watched a couple of clips, and then just sent me a DM on Instagram basically saying, why would you do this show? And then we end up just getting in a bit of a banter pretty much for 5 or 6 messages just about our 2 reality shows and how different they were. And then we decided to meet purely to catch up over a drink on a Sunday arvo. Purely to sort of discuss reality shows. And mine was just about to finish. Hers had been finished for 6 months. So she was in a position to give me a bit of insight into what was about to happen.
That's amazing.
Yeah, fast forward 2.5 years and we just advertised she's pregnant and we're due in February. So yeah.
Mate, congratulations.
That's such a cool times.
It's such a cool story. I wonder if I'll have any listeners of my show reach out to me with I shouldn't laugh.
Yeah.
I should give a shout out to my partner who actually connected the two of us. So that's not at all what I'm after, but that is a great story nonetheless.
Yeah.
Hey mate, you've obviously got this platform now, like I touched on. You're doing some work with LIVIN. That's really what I wanted to unpack a little bit about today. But just for some context, how did that kind of come about for you? I know just chatting with you off air, that started out as something that you were an ambassador for, obviously, drawn to that for certain reasons, and now of course a facilitator with some of the programs that they offer. But before we dive into that, what's that story look like for you? How do you end up kind of connecting with what they're up to, and why was that important for you?
Yeah. So I grew up in a small country rural town of Goulburn in rural New South Wales, and it was a small town of about 25,000. I often look back now and sort of think it might have been small town syndrome. School we went to, I sort of got stuck with some good blokes, ripper blokes, but they were probably the wrong crowd to get around. Probably didn't get involved in too much trouble, but probably went down a path where, probably, I don't know, good or bad, it sort of led me to maybe have some issues later on in life. Like good blokes, and I'm still friends with them today, but just a little bit naughty. And I sort of after sort of joining the military in the early 2000s, I took off overseas for about 2 years, and I lived in New Zealand, then I lived in Canada in about 2003, 2004. Basically returned home, and in about 2006, I was living back home, living with my mum and dad, and it was the first time I'd probably lived at home or been around mum and dad for about 12 years since I left school. And being with them and living with them on a 24-hour basis, it was probably the first time, and I was 30 at the time, and it was probably the first time my mum saw me firsthand on a daily basis, and sort of the ups and downs that I was going through. And maybe she pulled me aside probably after about 6 months of living together, and she sort of said, look, I'm just noticing some subtle changes in your behavior that I've never really noticed before because you haven't been at home for too long. And I just figured, I'm 30 years old, I'm bulletproof, and I'm 6'4", 110 kilos, training every day and living the dream that I didn't have anything wrong with me. I didn't expect there to be anything wrong. Why would there be anything wrong with me? And it wasn't until probably a couple of months later when I just remember being in a real funk, real low, and she rang me out of the blue when I was driving home and asked me what I wanted for dinner, and I just ended up breaking down and just being like, Jesus, maybe there is something not right, not 100% right. So she said to me, look, she's a nurse, so she was in the sort of the physical health area, and said, look, Mark, why don't you go and speak to someone? Why don't you go and chat to someone about this? And I was like, why would I want to go and give, tell some bloke that I never met what I'm doing, what I'm going through? I was sort of thought, why? I'm 30 years old. I've been through ups and downs for 30 years. Why would someone want to try and unpack that in an hour? So I went and saw a bloke, and basically at the end of it, he said to me, Mark, I can't give you, there's no right or wrong when it comes to self-care. That's one thing that I've learned. He said, you've just got to do whatever suits you and whatever makes you take your mind off things. And my mind just used to go at 1,000 miles an hour. And basically he said to me, Mark, I said, if I can give you one thing today, he said, spend 15 minutes a day, every day, with no phones, no TV, and just on your own. So from then, I've just basically tried to do it every day, just 15 minutes. What I used to do was basically go and lie on the floor with my legs up on the wall.
Yep.
With all the blood rushed down, and then just basically take myself away for 15 minutes. No music, no phones, no conversations. That's just something I've just done for every day since.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
I like that.
And then probably about 3 years later, after probably realizing that I knew that there wasn't any place for males in particular. Now, I'm not saying that this is only based on me. I'm not trying to say that it's only males. But for me personally, I just sort of never found somewhere where I was comfortable in talking to other people about this, even outside of the room of this psychologist. And I remember stumbling across the LIVIN at a health and fitness convention. I just went in there just to see what was going on and chatting to the bloke that was there, and really liked his mantra. They were a company or an organization that had been created in about 2013 after the suicide of one of their very close mates. And they were the same. They didn't know anything was wrong with him. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to have those conversations. So they created the brand or the organization LIVIN purely to try to get males in particular to encourage conversation. So I thought, wow, great company to be a part of. Bought some of their merchandise, and then basically was ambassador for them. And then basically last year, I used to run a small cafe in St Kilda. And sorry if I'm going on a bit.
Good.
Yeah, and I was running a small cafe in St Kilda last year, and fortunately, I was actually able to stay open during COVID, which I'm very grateful for. And but I saw firsthand what COVID was doing to people, mums, dads, single mums, kids, and I could see firsthand that they were sort of using me as a tool to sort of get out of the house, have a chat, stand around in a cafe and have human interaction. So I sort of saw firsthand not devastation, but the dramatic impact that COVID was having on people from all walks of life, 90-year-old grandmas to 6-year-old kids that would come in and get a marshmallow every day. That's because it was their highlight. So I reached out to LIVIN in about late last year and basically said, look, is there any opportunities maybe to, I knew that they had a facilitated program already going in Queensland. And I said, look, is there any opportunities maybe to branch out into Melbourne, given the severity of mental health down here at the moment? And they said, yep, great. So they came down in February, did the training package. And so just been trying to do as much as we can, unfortunately, due to COVID again, even though I believe it's probably the time of our lives that we need it the most.
I know.
We're actually not in a position to do much. So, yeah, so that's my story. I'm even at 44, I'm 45 very soon, but even at 44, I've now found that I'm in a good position to be able to talk about my own story. I sort of found talking to people that I can relate to people, probably just because I'm your average bloke. Yeah. I don't have a certificate on the wall. I've done 1,000 jobs. I do a bit of training. I try and eat as regular as I can. Try to sleep as much as I can. I've had a couple of jobs. I was on a TV show for a bit, which just allows me the opportunity to have that platform, which I'm very grateful for. But I think it's quite relatable in the sense that I'm not, an A-grade celebrity, or I'm not someone with the certificates on the wall that I've done all these university degrees. I've basically just lived life, and I struggle at times. I still do. I've learned how to manage those times, but yeah, I think we all go through ups and downs. I think it's just part and parcel of being a human.
I reckon the relatability piece is huge, and that's ultimately why I wanted to connect with you a bit more, mate, and get you on the show. And that's something that I try and put out to the world is like, hey, just an average sort of dude, but it's just part of the human experience. Sometimes you have ups, sometimes you have downs, and I think knowing how to kind of, where possible, sort of mitigate the downs, but perhaps more importantly, just make the right context around when you are feeling a bit down so that you don't spiral out of control. And it can happen very easily for anyone. And so it's that relatability piece is really important for people to connect to go, fuck, all right, these guys that I can maybe connect to emotionally and on some level, it's like, okay, maybe it's almost opening up a door just to, for those people to reach out and say, I'm actually struggling with this, or I'd actually like some improvements with this. And I suppose that goes a long way to at least chipping away at that stigma you touched on, that we are trying to break. I guess for you, mate, is whether it's from your own experience or some of the workshops that you've done or the involvement that you've had with LIVIN to date, are there certain reasons you think that stigma exists? And perhaps let's just start with the men's space. Where does that stigma come from?
Yeah. Oh,
It's a tough one, I know, and I don't
It
expect
is
you
a
to have
tough
all the
one.
answers, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
something I often sort of pontificate on because it's
Mm.
very rife, and I also struggled for a period of time. I mean, listeners of my show, I won't bore, they know my story, but I mean, there was a period of time where, similar to what you touched on in that story there, Mark, was, I was struggling. I actually knew I was struggling, but I was like, fuck, I had this persona of like, sports guy, bit of a womanizer, and albeit like a bit of a facade, like it felt safe just to stay in that kind of portrayal to the world. And so for me, that was where I was like, oh, I don't want to kind of expose myself to anyone. Yeah. So for you in your own story or people that you've come across, do you think there's reasons for that stigma?
I don't really know. And to be honest, you could ask probably 100 different blokes about this question. You probably get 100 different answers. For me personally, it was the fear of being judged, and it was the fear of being weak. And that's something that I've learned, that you're not alone, like you're not on your own. I guarantee you, out of the 100 blokes that you ask, all of them will have had ups and downs or shitty days in their time. Unfortunately, probably 95 to 96 of those probably won't admit it. And that was me. That was me for a long, long time. I used to do things in my life that would hurt me in other ways. And I would use, like, for instance, I'd go out and have 3 or 4 big nights in a row, because being on the piss at 2 a.m, having a blinder, that was my way of releasing some of that tension. I'd go out and randomly buy something that I would never ever use. I went out and bought a guitar, because I was driving around and I thought, I wouldn't mind knowing how to play this song on a guitar. So I went and bought a $400 guitar. Never used it. But I was like, that was one way of me like getting that rush, because I've never been really into drugs. I've had a few nights on the piss, no doubt. Who hasn't? But I've never really been into drugs. So that was my way of boosting up like my own morale. Was going out and buying things, going out and hurting myself financially, going out and spending money that I didn't have, going out and drinking quite heavily, because being intoxicated, that gave you that sudden rush. Then the problem was 2 or 3 days you're spending in bed, not feeling so good. But that was my way of hurting myself. But I didn't know that at the time, until I was like, wow, what, so you start studying yourselves and studying your own behavior as to what you were doing to yourself to sort of cause harm. Like even, just going out. So, look, I really don't know what the stigma is and why people are still so afraid. I think it's just because of judgmental. I think so always, too. Yeah. And it might look, I don't know the age of your listeners, but I think it could also be generational. I know males that, my dad's sort of era, that you just dusted yourself off. Yeah. You got up in the morning, you're having a shitty day, you didn't talk about it. You just dusted yourself off. And so maybe it's generational, maybe the fact that with social media these days, there is a lot more conversation surrounding it. So people are actually in position. Back 20, 30 years ago, you'd go to the pub with your mates and you'd talk about it, and that'd be really it. Yeah. So you wouldn't ever sit down with your mates and say, oh, I'm not having the best day, because I don't know. Yeah. So I don't know.
The impact of like societal and cultural norms is something I'm really passionate about. So to that point on like an older demographic, old generation, where like, the norm, so to speak, rightly or wrongly, it wasn't encouraged to, kind of pontificate and express your feelings out loud. It just wasn't the norm. And so you kind of just naturally live into that. I find as a human is like, whatever the people around you are doing, it is going to create a space or not for you. And so, particularly now with the younger demographic and social media, it's encouraging more and more conversation, which is a really good place. Really good place to start. And so I guess the next piece goes into like, well, what does that conversation look like? Part of it, of course, is connecting with the right people. And, you and I are not qualified professionals. Well, I'm not anyway. I'll share my 2 cents, because I feel like I've had my own journey and, have some tools and practices, I think, that have helped dramatically, not just get from a place of debilitating depression, and I've been pretty upfront with listeners of my show, to getting from there back to neutral, but then also taking it to that next level. Like, okay, how can we make sure life is enjoyed and not endured, and sort of putting things in place. But that's my thing. And I suppose it comes back to what you said earlier, Mark, of like, hey, maybe it's just experimenting to find what works for you. You know, maybe it's that 15 minutes a day.
I think what I've learned in the mental health space is that one size doesn't fit all, and you've really got to do whatever suits you. And to be honest, it could be anything. You know, I don't think that no one's going to judge if that's something that you do. Like I literally lie on the ground with my feet up on the wall and allow all the blood rush down through the body. So when I stand up, all the new blood rushes down, and then I just have 15 minutes on my own. Beautiful. I try to turn the mind off. I just don't think about anything. Don't think about work. Don't think about outside world. And it's a little bit selfish because I just spend 15 minutes zoning out. But that's how I have learned to deal with it. I've also surrounded myself. I mean, I'm 45 soon, so I've surrounded myself with good people. And I think if you put a good vibe out to the world, good things happen. And for whatever reason, you know, I put myself in a position where I did that TV show, and from that, easily the best thing that's ever happened to me has come out of it. And I went on the show to find love. I was genuinely there for that reason. And weirdly, in a weird way, it came about 6 months after filming. So I feel like if you put the positive vibes out the universe, something will return. Will return serve.
I agree. And then without, like, this is a rabbit hole to go down, which I'll be really aware not to do because I can get way too excited. But there is also, you know, there's a lot of science to support, like, if you are putting good vibes out and intentional about, you know, being in a certain state of being or a certain mood, you will literally change the biology, the neurochemistry of, like, your internal experience. You'll actually start living into that and start feeling good. So there's like this idea of reciprocity, that like these good things will come back to you in whatever ways you believe in. But then also, like, even just in the moment, the idea of trying to smile, make someone laugh, trying to, like, that will inherently make us feel better, at least a little bit anyway. So I think that's a really cool tool that, you know, I try and encourage people to adopt as well.
Yeah. Surround yourself with good people. Good things happen.
100%, mate. What's what I'm trying to do with you right here. I should say as well, you know, we're laughing off air about the lighting that you've got going on there with the setup here, mate. You're pushing 45. You're looking fucking good for 45, I got to say.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Obviously the gyms are closed. So Bianca went out and hired like one of those watt bikes. So we just do sessions in the backyard every couple of days. We're not breaking any records. But yeah, we get up and about. Nice. Go for a walk most mornings. That's just our way of starting the day. So
love it.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the programs really quickly. So, of course, you know, COVID restrictions here in Victoria makes it hard, which, you know, the catch-22 is, or the irony, I should say, is, you know, we probably need it now more than ever. Let's say things open up, you know, 2022, and you're on the road and you're speaking to different groups. I guess what I want to know is, are there certain groups that you're hoping to connect with, and what does that session look like? Is there a sort of a one key message you're hoping people can walk away with?
So with LIVIN, we do pretty much like a 45-minute presentation, and it's more surrounding mental health education and stigma reduction. So I don't think anybody, you can spend as much time as you want with someone, but unless they take whatever you want away and put it into practice, it's difficult to get that message across. Our probably biggest, for me anyway, the biggest message that I try to get across is self-care. I think that when you do physical first aid, the first thing you do is in that like acronym.
Doctors ABCD.
The first thing you do is danger, because you've got to look after yourself before you place yourself in that situation. So I've done the mental health first aid training course as well. And the very first thing they do is, again, tell you that to do self-care. And I think that's probably the biggest message that I've learned, is to try to look after yourself first before you can ask somebody else, because you don't want to put yourself in danger, or you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're not ready to have that conversation. So you need to be in a position first and foremost to be able to help someone out. So the LIVIN Well program is about 45 minutes, touches on everything. It touches on what mental health is. It basically sort of differentiates between mental health and mental illness. It does draws comparisons to physical health. Goes through self-care. It goes through areas where you can find help or professional help if you need it. And it's basically just there to try to break the stigma, to basically break that, just try to open that conversation. I really feel at the moment, teenage kids are the big area of focus. I think kids are doing online school. They have been in Melbourne for a long period of time. I got some schoolmates. I got some mates that are actually school teachers. They're just finding the Zoom sort of stuff is just not a great way for a teenage kid to spend their days. Kids at the moment, playgrounds are closed. I heard a rumor earlier that they might be reopening. I think it's now starting to get to a point where the governments are realising that. And I don't want to get political. I don't get political. I understand what we're doing. I'm not trying to get political, but I think they're now starting to think that, or at least understand that mental health is now probably a bigger concern than COVID itself. So they're obviously going to start putting things in, hopefully start putting things in place. But the biggest message for me, I think that the teenage genre, the area, the demographic are probably at the biggest risk because they're the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
You know, they're the ones that are on social media. I could talk about social media all day, and the sort of black and white. It's such a grey area for me, the social media. It's allowed me opportunities to voice, have things and to have a voice and to have that platform. But that's not all business skittles, mate. You get the messages, you get the hate, you get the people that have no photos, no voice, they're just accounts are just non-existent and they just tee off, So, look, I treat social media warily, and it's a double-edged sword. When I finished shooting MAFS and my finale aired, where it'd end the relationship with Ning, there would have been 400 messages on DMs, just telling me to go hang myself and just ruthless, and I take the good with the bad. Yeah, it's a bit water for ducks back, but like as a teenage kid, they're vulnerable. Social media presents a lifestyle that isn't normal lifestyle. People are only putting out the good parts of their life and what they want to see. Yeah. So these teenage kids that are trying to work their way around life and school and that, and then looking at all these people that are sitting on a boat, So.
And if they don't have the luxury of, you mentioned the good people around you, you've got your beautiful partner, you've got friends, you've also got you're old enough now to have lived life and sort of built your own personal philosophies. You've probably got a little bit of resilience. Yep. It's like you've got these almost like this arsenal of things to fall back on when you're, like you said, they are vulnerable teens. It's like if unfortunately they find themselves in a position where maybe they don't have the luxury of tons of friends, a partner, they've got all these self-esteem issues, and now they don't even have the they're not moving their body much because they're locked down. And then all of a sudden, like you're just in this very vulnerable position. It just takes one message. It could even just be misinterpreted. And all of a sudden you draw that person draws context that, hey, that person hates me. I don't fit in. Goes into the idea that humans are wired for connection. If that's not getting met and you feel like you're ostracized from the tribe, you can see how potentially nasty it is. And so that idea of like social media being a double-edged sword, I totally get, because there's some beautiful messages and stuff out there that maybe help in the moment, but it's like, if they're not well equipped with the awareness, and that's probably a large part of what you'd be hoping to do, I imagine, with some of the programs, is like just providing a little bit of education of like, hey, just something to be aware of so they don't find themselves in that trap.
And look, I think there's so much, as much as there's a lot of hate online, there's so many good things, and you got so many good companies these days. Like the Resilience Project with who you got Gussie Warland doing the Gotcha for Life. You've got LIVIN. You've got so many of these Tomorrow Man, Tomorrow Woman. You've got all these people that are doing the right thing and trying to get their message out. So as much as there's a lot of haters, there's a lot of good movements out there at the moment that are really drawing a lot of good attention onto the mental health spaces. So
I agree.
I think we spend so much of our day consumed by trying to be physically fit, but nobody realizes that they need to spend a little bit of their day on becoming mentally fit. And I think that's the conversation that we need to start having and normalize that conversation. Because without that being mental fit, you're not going to be days off to a bad start. So
mate, I really, really like that idea of just there's not one size that fits all. And I think particularly, I have a lot of guests on the show and I put out content and ideas myself. And a lot of it's just kind of almost like a virtual diary of like what I'm up to and like, hey, here's an idea. But I think that's, if there's one kind of message that I like violently adhere to, it is that like there is no one size fits all. And so I think that's just an important caveat when you might listen to a conversation like ours or stumble across, a piece on social or a blog or whatever it might be, and it could be extremely valuable. But that, for whatever reason, it just may not be the perfect recipe for you. And I reckon that's important for people to kind of understand of like, hey, these 7 or 8 best tools for mental health, like on paper makes sense and it's worth exploring with curiosity. But if it doesn't kind of, like it might need to be adjusted, or you might need to add your own flair to it. Like ultimately all that matters is feeling good. And if that needs to, you know what I mean? Like if you need to find something that's a little bit different, that's super okay.
Yeah, even in the LIVIN Care, the LIVIN Well package, when they touch on self-care, they talk about mindfulness and breathing. And I actually even admit that I've tried that and it doesn't work. Like there are people out there that love it. That's what they do. And I love that, the fact that they found their thing that works. But for me, it doesn't. Sometimes chucking on some songs for me, 10 minutes, listen to some good tunes, that might be all it needs. So one size fits all, and you just got to find something that you enjoy doing, and it's for 15 minutes a day. People always say to me, "Oh, I don't have the time. I don't have the time during, with all." No, you do.
Yeah, 100%.
I can guarantee you that people have 15 minutes a day where they can put down that bloody phone, stop scrolling, turn off the TV, and just spend 15. It's not hard. It's not hard.
So I touched on it very briefly, but there is also an apparel line with LIVIN, and it looks pretty fire. So before we wrap, how can people learn more about the apparel, and then also some of the workshops, and how can they connect with you if they want to say hello?
Or reach out on social media. I'm happy to have a chat. Just send me a DM. I do still check them. Sometimes they're funny. But I still check them if anyone wants to reach out. I'm more than happy to have a chat. I understand COVID is and probably will be in our lives for a while. So I understand this sort of stuff, Zooms and conversations over phone is part and parcel of life these days. LIVIN is just LIVIN.org. So it's not LIVIN. We just dropped a new apparel range. The LIVIN Well programs, you can find all the information on the website, the livin.org. You can just find all the information about the LIVIN Well programs. We're starting to get back into it now. We've got a couple of bookings coming up soon in Bendigo, a couple in Ringwood School in mid-October. I know that you're only allowed to travel, but the state government is obviously now realising this isn't quite an important message, and they're now starting to allow travel to schools to present this program. So we're starting to get a bit up and running now. Businesses, Are You OK Day is coming up on the 9th. I really like Are You OK because it does generate a conversation. However, one thing that I sort of think, it's good to do it on one day, but I think there's 364 other days of the year where we need to have the same conversation. So as much as I enjoy that day and I'm glad that it exists, there's still a long way to go. But this is Mark Scrivens is my Instagram account. Send me a DM, happy to chat. Livin.org, we just dropped a new range. There's the famous hoodies. Chris Hemsworth was in one of the hoodies a couple of years ago, and that's generated a fair bit of interest. We are expanding into Melbourne. So I'm the only facilitator down here at the moment. We're just looking at once things open back up again, and who knows how long, we might try to generate a few more. But
awesome. I'll put all I'll put all the links in the show notes. But Mark, mate, appreciate you making the time. Good to chat. Hopefully when things open up, we can go a beer or a coffee and
100%.
Chat a bit more off air too. So tons of value in that, and really appreciate it, my man.
Unreal. Great. Good to chat. Love getting this message out.